Hello, everyone. This is Whitney Will from Star Hearth Astrology, and I'm continuing my series of Astrology 101, the glossary of astrology. What are we even talking about? And this video today is going to introduce you to the key concepts of relationship astrology and what we're looking at and what we're talking about when we are looking at comparing two charts to see how people get along, to see what their relationships are likely to be and how it is we do that. If you've never looked at a chart before, go back and watch my chart tour video so that you kind of have some basic understanding of the terms that we're using, because right now we're going to jump into the first part of relationship astrology, which is really called synastry. Now, sign comes from the Greek syn, which means, it's the same root as synergy, and how we bring things together and compare them. And astry, obviously, the stars. So we have bringing the stars together, right? We are literally looking at the nature of things. Okay, for this explanation, I am going to be looking at two different charts. These charts are I just plucked them from the ether. They are not based on a real relationship. Any resemblance to any real partnerships is accidental. Okay, so we have partner two's chart. And in this Luna astrology software, we can add another chart by asking for a synastry biwheel. And we are going to look for partner. Okay, and here we have two charts on top of each other. So you can see we have partner two in the center, and we have added partner one's chart on the outside. And what we are going to do is compare how the charts interact with each other. The first thing we need to ask ourselves when we're looking at is, what is the nature of the relationship that we're looking at? Because until we have that answered, we don't know what is relevant. With synastry, we can compare two charts of anything, right? We can take your chart and we can compare it to the Declaration of Independence, and we will have some connection between that. And while that may give us interesting information as to how you might personally feel about the Declaration of Independence, it doesn't really matter, and it might not be important knowing what your relationship with that is like. The needs between a mother and a child are going to be different than that between romantic partners, than that between siblings, than that between business partners. So knowing the nature of the relationship will sensitize us to different parts of the chart. How intimate is the relationship emotionally, physically, right? What are the requirements? And so how do we look at the compatibility, or how those charts compare, based on what the purpose of that relationship is and the nature of the relationship. So we start there before we even look at a chart. And then what we are going to look at is comparing the more salient parts of the chart to each other to see how they function together. And so one of the things that we look at is the sun sign of the individuals. The moon sign, even more important. I have a whole video about how the moon sign is more important than the sun sign when we're talking about relationships. We look for romantic relationships or anything where harmony is a priority. We're going to look at Venus, where we have to deal with pleasure. But now this can also be relevant to like a business partnership, especially if it has to do with making money. How one person's Venus works for the other person. Now, when we are looking, the kind of second piece, when we're looking at synastry, after knowing the nature of the relationship, is Understanding that in some ways, synastry is like transit astrology. Now, transit astrology would look at a birth chart and would look at where the planets are moving now and use those relationships to make predictions. In synastry, another person is basically a permanent transit to your chart, which is to say, their placements are going to bring alive parts of your chart. So we might have somebody that has a sun in the 8th house where they don't really feel seen or they have some insecurity about it. And they might find a partner or a friendship with somebody that has Jupiter right on that sun. And so that faith and that support from Jupiter can help them step into their sun a little bit more. Or we might find someone with a Mercury that's chatty enough, and yet in a certain relationship, they might always feel kind of oppressed or like the person doesn't let them say what they need to say. And we might find one person's Saturn in a square to another person's. So we see these relationships as permanent transits. And so when we look at relationships in that way, we can see kind of where the gifts are and where the challenges might be in comparing those two charts. And that is really important to know because it's there that we can kind of hack our relationships, but more importantly, not take the behavior of the other person personally, and to have a map of how the other person functions so that our reference point for seeing our partners or our children or our parents or our colleagues is not whatever doesn't make sense in their behavior towards us, but in seeing them as a whole individual in themselves with a completely different way of functioning than we ourselves have, and to see both where that works really well and where there are pain points. So in doing that, we're going to compare two charts and we're going to look at, okay, where are the conjunctions? Where do they line up? Ooh, this person has a Saturn-Uranus conjunction on the other person's moon. That is going to be interesting in how that plays out in the. Now, there's another way to look at two charts and the astrology of a relationship itself, and that is called the composite chart, and collapse them into one chart. And this chart is then the chart of the relationship. So if the relationship were a person, what we could tell about it, what we would see in the relationship. So it has added partner two's chart to partner one's chart. And basically what it has done is found the average, the midpoint between each of the placements. Partner one and partner two were Capricorn rising, so the relationship itself becomes a Capricorn rising with the ascendant at the midpoint between their two ascendants. The moon is at the midpoint between their two moons. One of them had the moon in Libra, the other one had the moon in Sag. They come together to have a moon conjunct Pluto in Scorpio. And so in that way, we can understand how a relationship can seem to have a kind of karmic gift of its own, how we can have access to gifts or challenges within a relationship that neither of us quite have outside of one. So that is quite powerful. We can also see the kind of purpose of the relationship, and this can be especially helpful when we're dealing with relationships of conflict, relationships that didn't go well. Relationship astrology is so powerful for creating conditions of understanding and opportunities for kind of forgiveness or for letting go or for making peace, right? The main way that people tend to use it or start learning about it is to figure out if you were meant to be with your current beloved. And yet find that a real gift of relationship astrology too. How do I understand the ways that I don't get along with my mother or the way that my child frustrates me? And how can I externalize that into the relationship chart in such a way that I become less reactive because I can see it drawn up objectively? Now, the other cool thing about composite charts is that they respond to transits. So now, in addition to looking at the purpose of the relationship, to examining the relationship as its own self, a kind of transcendent third, I can look at the relationship over time and see what gets activated, when it gets activated, knowing that we're heading into a particularly unstable point with a Uranus transit, or that here's the time to plan our vow renewal when Venus is stationing right on our composite. I do relationship readings, which you can book through my website. I'm also a marriage and family therapist, so I come at it from that lens as well. I have not forgotten about my rising signs and relationships videos, and I will be making more of those, but I wanted to give us a little bit more groundwork because I think that they were kind of going over people's heads. So hopefully this helps. Let me know in the comments and subscribe and follow along for more. Thank you.